The dust devil twisted across Main Street in Columbus, New Mexico, carrying with it the scorching heat of August 1883 and the sound of Eleanor O'Brien's laughter as she stepped out of her father's general store. She had lived in this border town her entire 22 years, watching drifters and cowboys pass through like tumbleweeds, never expecting any of them to look twice at the shopkeeper's daughter with flour perpetually dusting her dark hair and calluses on her palms from hauling crates. But Yates Rutherford wasn't like the other men who rode into town seeking supplies before crossing into Mexico or heading north toward the silver mines. He sat motionless on his bay horse in the middle of the street, his weathered face shaded by a black Stetson, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget the list of inventory she'd been mentally cataloging. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the relentless New Mexican sun. She smoothed her apron and tried to walk past him with the dignity her mother had insisted upon before consumption had taken her 3 winters ago, but her boot caught on an uneven plank, and she stumbled. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, catching her elbow before she could hit the ground. His hand was rough and warm, his grip steady, and when she looked up into his face, she saw sun-weathered skin, a strong jaw, and hazel eyes that seemed to hold entire conversations he hadn't yet spoken aloud. "Thank you," she managed, her voice coming out breathier than she intended. "I'm usually more coordinated than that." He didn't release her arm immediately. Instead, he studied her face as though committing it to memory, then said in a voice like gravel and honey, "Eleanor O'Brien." She blinked. "How do you know my name?" asked around. He finally let go of her elbow, and she felt the absence of his touch like a physical thing. Wanted to know who the woman with the smile that could light up this whole dusty town was. Eleanor laughed, the sound escaping before she could stop it. "That's quite a line, Mr. Rutherford." "Yates Rutherford." He tilted his hat back slightly. "And it's not a line, madam. It's the truth." Something in his tone made her pause. Most men who tried to court her used flowery phrases they'd clearly rehearsed, words that meant nothing and promised even less. But Yates spoke with a directness that was almost disconcerting, as though he'd already decided something important and was simply waiting for her to catch up. "Well, Mr. Rutherford, I appreciate the compliment, but I have work to do." She started to turn away, but he moved slightly, not blocking her path but drawing her attention back to him. "Just Yates." He crouched down suddenly, and Eleanor watched in confusion as he extended his finger and began tracing something in the dust at her feet. She couldn't make out what he was writing at first, the letters forming slowly, deliberately. Then she recognized it, her name. Eleanor O'Brien, written in the dust of Main Street with careful, methodical strokes. She laughed again, unable to help herself. "What are you doing?" But when she looked at his face as he stood, brushing his hands against his worn denim pants, she saw no trace of humor. His expression was serious, almost solemn, his jaw set in a way that suggested he'd made a decision that couldn't be unmade. That look stopped her laughter in her throat and rooted her feet to the ground when every sensible instinct told her to walk away from this strange cowboy and his strange gestures. "Claiming something," he said simply. "Making my intentions known. By writing my name in the dust." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "That's not how courting works, Mr. Rutherford." "Yates," he corrected again. "And I don't know much about proper courting, Miss O'Brien. I know horses and cattle and hard work. I know the difference between a good rope and a bad one, between honest men and liars. And I know, the moment I rode into this town 3 days ago and saw you carrying those feed sacks into your father's store like they weighed nothing, that I'd found something worth staying for." Eleanor's mouth went dry. 3 days. "You've been watching me for 3 days, trying to work up the courage to talk to you," he admitted, and that confession, so plainly stated, did something strange to her chest. "Figured I'd better do it now before my nerve failed entirely." She should have been alarmed. Should have called for her father or one of the ranch hands who sometimes loitered outside the saloon. But there was something in Yates's eyes that wasn't threatening, just honest and raw and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen in a man before. "You don't even know me," she said softly. "Then let me." He gestured to the letters he'd written in the dust. "Let me know you. Let me court you proper if you'll teach me how." A gust of wind blew down the street, erasing part of her name, and Eleanor watched the dust swirl and resettle. This was madness. She had responsibilities, a father who depended on her to run the store since his arthritis had gotten so bad he could barely hold a pencil to do the account books. She had a life here, predictable and safe. This cowboy, with his serious face and his dust-written declarations, represented everything uncertain and wild that she'd taught herself not to want. But when she opened her mouth to say no, what came out instead was, "My father will want to meet you." The smile that broke across Yates's face transformed him entirely, softening the hard edges and revealing a warmth that made her knees weak. "I'd be honored, Miss O'Brien." "Eleanor," she said, surprising herself. "If we're going to do this, you should call me Eleanor." Her father, Thomas O'Brien, was less than thrilled when she brought Yates into the store 20 minutes later. He stood behind the counter, his gnarled hands resting on the worn wood, his blue eyes sharp despite his 63 years. He'd seen too many drifters try to charm his daughter, men looking for an easy life running a profitable store rather than actually caring about the woman who kept the shelves stocked and the customers happy. "Papa, this is Yates Rutherford," Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt. "He'd like permission to call on me." Thomas looked Yates up and down, taking in the dusty boots, the worn leather chaps, the calloused hands that marked him as a working man. "You got a job, Rutherford?" "Yes, sir. Just hired on at the Garrett Ranch, 10 miles north. Working cattle, mending fences, whatever needs doing." Yates met Thomas's gaze directly. "I'm a hard worker, sir. Don't drink to excess, don't gamble, don't start fights. I've got money saved and I'm looking to put down roots." "In Columbus." Thomas's skepticism was evident. "Most cowboys are just passing through." "Most cowboys haven't met your daughter, sir." Eleanor felt her cheeks flame, but her father's expression didn't soften. "Pretty words. I've heard plenty of those. Then I'll prove it with actions." Yates's voice remained steady, respectful, but not servile. "Give me a chance, Mr. O'Brien. Let me show you I'm serious about Eleanor." Thomas was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the counter. Finally, he sighed. "Sunday supper. You come here after church, we'll eat together and we'll see, but I'm watching you, Rutherford. My daughter's been through enough losing her mother. I won't have some cowboy breaking her heart." "I understand, sir." Yates nodded. "And I promise you that's the last thing I want to do." After Yates left, touching his hat to Eleanor with a look that made her stomach flutter, Thomas turned to his daughter. "You sure about this, Ellie?" She wasn't sure about anything except the way her heart had raced when Yates had written her name in the dust with such careful deliberation, and the way his serious expression had made her believe, just for a moment, that she might be someone worth claiming. "No," she admitted. "But I want to find out." The days between that Wednesday afternoon and Sunday supper felt both endless and far too short. Eleanor found herself watching the door of the store, hoping to catch a glimpse of Yates riding past, then scolding herself for acting like a silly girl instead of a grown woman. She'd had suitors before, respectable men from good families, but none of them had made her feel this strange combination of excitement and nervousness that kept her awake at night, staring at the ceiling of her small bedroom and wondering what she was getting herself into. On Saturday, Yates appeared in the store just before closing. Eleanor was on a ladder, reaching for a bolt of fabric on the top shelf that Mrs. Henderson had special ordered from Santa Fe when she heard the door chime. She looked down and nearly lost her balance when she saw him standing there, hat in hand, looking up at her with concern. "Careful," he said, moving to steady the ladder. "That's a long fall." "I've done this 1,000 times," Eleanor replied, but she was acutely aware of his presence below her, his hands gripping the ladder's sides. She grabbed the fabric and descended, finding herself face to face with him when she reached the bottom rung. He didn't step back, and neither did she. "I wanted to see you," he said simply. "Tomorrow feels too far away." Eleanor's breath caught. No one had ever said such things to her before. "I'm working. I can see that." He glanced around the store, taking in the neat shelves, the carefully organized inventory. "You do all this yourself?" "Papa helps when he can, but his hands hurt too much these days." She set the fabric bolt on the counter. "I don't mind. I grew up in this store. I know every inch of it. You love it." It wasn't a question. Eleanor considered. "I love what it represents. My grandparents started this place 40 years ago with almost nothing. My parents kept it going through droughts and raids and everything else this territory could throw at them. It's part of me." Yates nodded slowly. "I understand that. My father had a ranch in Texas before the drought of '73 wiped him out. Lost everything. He died trying to rebuild, worked himself into an early grave." His voice held old pain. "I swore I'd never let that happen to me, that I'd be smarter, more careful. But lately I've been thinking maybe being careful isn't the same as being alive." Eleanor's heart squeezed. "Is that what I am? Your attempt to live instead of just survive? You're more than that." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're the first thing that's made me want to build instead of just drift." The door chime rang again, and they sprang apart as Mr. Patterson from the telegraph office entered, looking for some tobacco. Eleanor served him with burning cheeks, hyper-aware of Yates standing quietly by the window, pretending to examine a display of rope while he waited. After Mr. Patterson left, she locked the door and flipped the closed sign. "I should go," Yates said, but he didn't move toward the door. "Tomorrow," Eleanor reminded him, "Sunday supper, don't be late. I'll be here when the church bells finish ringing." He settled his hat back on his head. "Eleanor." "Yes, thank you for giving me a chance." He said it with such sincerity that she felt something crack open in her chest, some wall she'd built without realizing it. "Don't thank me yet," she said, trying to lighten the moment. "You haven't tasted my cooking." His smile was slow and warm. "I'm sure it's perfect." After he left, Eleanor leaned against the locked door and pressed her hands to her flaming cheeks. She was in trouble, she realized. Deep, serious trouble. Because she was already halfway to falling for a cowboy she barely knew, and the sensible part of her that had always made practical decisions was being drowned out by the part that remembered how his hand had felt against her cheek, and the way his eyes looked when he told her. She made him want to build something. Sunday arrived with brilliant sunshine and temperatures that promised to climb past 100 degrees by afternoon. Eleanor wore her best dress, a blue calico that her mother had made before she died, and spent far too long pinning up her hair before finally settling on a simple bun with a few curls framing her face. Her father watched her fuss with amusement. "He's just a cowboy, Ellie," Thomas said, but his tone was gentle. "Not the president. I know that." Eleanor adjusted her collar for the third time. "I just want to look nice." "You always look nice." Her father's expression softened. "You look like your mother. She'd be happy to see you giving someone a chance." Eleanor's eyes stung. Her mother had died when Eleanor was 19, too young to lose the woman who taught her everything about strength and grace and running a household. Thomas had never remarried, pouring himself into the store and his daughter, and Eleanor knew he worried about leaving her alone when his time came. "You think I'm being foolish?" she asked quietly. "I think you're being hopeful," Thomas replied, "and there's nothing foolish about that." The church bells rang, clear and bright in the hot morning air, and exactly as the last peal faded, there was a knock at the door. Eleanor's stomach flipped. She opened it to find Yates standing on the porch, scrubbed clean and wearing what were clearly his best clothes: dark trousers, a white shirt that looked freshly pressed, a string tie, and a brown vest. His hair was still damp from washing, and he held a bunch of wildflowers that he must have picked that morning. "For you," he said, offering the flowers. "I know they're not fancy like the ones from a shop, but I thought you might like them." Eleanor took the flowers, desert marigolds and penstemon and Indian paintbrush, and felt her heart swell. "They're beautiful, much better than hothouse roses." She arranged the flowers in a jar while her father and Yates made stiff small talk in the parlor, then called them both to the table. She'd prepared fried chicken and mashed potatoes, green beans from the small garden behind the store, and biscuits that had risen perfectly despite her nervousness. As they ate, Thomas questioned Yates with the thoroughness of a lawyer. "Where are you from originally?" "Born in East Texas, sir." "Little town called Henderson. My father moved us west when I was 12, looking for better ranching land. And your mother died when I was born, complications." Yates's voice was matter-of-fact, but Eleanor heard the old grief underneath. "My father raised me and my brother until Will was old enough to strike out on his own. Where's your brother now?" "Montana Territory, last I heard. Married a woman he met in Miles City, started a horse ranch." Yates smiled slightly. He always was better with horses than people. "And you? What are you good with?" Yates met Thomas's eyes steadily. "Cattle, hard work, keeping my word, and if you give me the chance, sir, taking care of your daughter." The words hung in the air. Eleanor felt her face heat, but she couldn't look away from Yates. Her father was silent for a long moment, then he set down his fork. Strong words for a man who just met her. "Yes, sir, but I mean them." Yates's voice didn't waver. "I know it seems fast. I know you've got every reason to send me packing. But I've spent 30 years of my life drifting, working other men's ranches, never finding a reason to stop moving. Your daughter is that reason, and I'm asking you to let me prove it." Thomas looked at Eleanor. "What do you think, Ellie?" She could have said it was too soon, too fast, too uncertain. She could have said she needed time to think. But when she looked at Yates, saw the vulnerability and hope in his eyes, she found herself saying, "I think I'd like to find out if he means it." Her father sighed. "Then I suppose we'll find out together. But Rutherford, if you hurt her, you'll have every right to shoot me, sir. I understand." After dinner, Eleanor and Yates sat on the porch while Thomas dozed in his chair inside, the heat and the heavy meal making him drowsy. The afternoon sun blazed down on Main Street, sending most of the town's residents inside to wait for cooler evening hours. Eleanor poured them both glasses of lemonade from the pitcher she'd made that morning. "You handled that well," she said. "My father's not easy to win over." "I meant every word I said to him." Yates took a sip of lemonade, his eyes closing briefly in appreciation. "This is delicious. My mother's recipe." Eleanor settled into the rocking chair, maintaining a proper distance between them. "She used to make it every Sunday during summer. Said it was the only thing that made the heat bearable." "Tell me about her." So Eleanor did. She talked about Catherine O'Brien, who had come west as a young bride and fallen in love with both her husband and the wild beauty of New Mexico Territory. She talked about how her mother had taught her to read using the labels on store inventory, how she'd insisted Eleanor learn mathematics so she could handle the account books, how she'd believed in education and independence even when other people thought it wasn't proper for a woman. "She sounds like she was remarkable," Yates said when Eleanor finally fell silent. "She was. Losing her was the hardest thing I've ever been through." Eleanor looked out at the dusty street. "Some days I still turn to tell her something and remember she's not there." Yates was quiet for a moment, then said, "My brother used to say our mother talked to him sometimes. He was only 2 when she died, so I don't know if he really remembered her or if it was just his imagination. But he swore sometimes he could hear her voice telling him to be careful or to take care of me. Do you think that's possible? That the people we love stay with us somehow?" "I'd like to think so." Yates looked at her with those serious eyes. "I'd like to think your mother knows you're going to be happy." "That's presumptuous," Eleanor said, but she was smiling. "We've only just met." "I know, but I'm a patient man, Eleanor. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to trust this." "This," he gestured between them. "Whatever this is. This thing that made me write your name in the dust like a fool and made you laugh but stay anyway." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. "You notice that I stayed. I notice everything about you." He set down his lemonade glass. "The way you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're thinking. The way you bite your lip when you're adding up numbers in your head. The way you light up when you talk about your mother, even though it hurts. That's a lot of noticing for 3 days of watching from afar," Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice light even as her heart raced. "Like I said, you're worth noticing." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, rocking gently in the afternoon heat. Then Yates said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you laugh when I wrote your name in the dust?" Eleanor considered. "Because it seemed absurd. Romantic gestures are supposed to be flowers and poetry, not scribbling in the dirt. And I thought you were mocking me, maybe, playing some kind of game. And then I saw your face, and I realized you were completely serious, that you meant it, whatever it was you were trying to say." She looked at him. "Why did you do it?" Yates leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. "My father couldn't read or write, never had the schooling for it. But when he found the land for his ranch, the land he was going to build our future on, he made an X in the dirt to mark it as his. He told me that sometimes the most important things you say aren't spoken aloud. They're written down where everyone can see them. A claim, a promise." He focused on Eleanor again. "I wanted to claim you, Eleanor. To write your name down where the whole world could see that I'd found something precious." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Even though the wind blew it away." "Doesn't matter. I know what I wrote. You know what I wrote. That's enough." She wanted to kiss him then, propriety be damned. But her father coughed inside and the moment passed. Still, when Yates left that evening, touching his hat and promising to see her soon, Eleanor stood on the porch long after he'd ridden away, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was still racing. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Eleanor had experienced before. Yates didn't bring her expensive presents or recite flowery poetry. Instead, he showed up every evening after work, dusty and tired, and helped her close the store. He carried heavy crates, restocked high shelves, swept the floors, and listened while she talked about her day. On Wednesday evenings, when she did the account books, he sat quietly nearby, whittling small figures from pieces of scrap wood, a horse, a bird, a tiny replica of the store, and leaving them for her to find. He also talked, slowly revealing pieces of himself. He told her about growing up poor in Texas, about learning to rope cattle when he was 8 years old, about the drought that had killed his father's dreams. He talked about the years he'd spent drifting, working ranches from Texas to Colorado, never finding a place that felt like home. And he talked about the moment he'd ridden into Columbus and seen her, how something had shifted in his chest and made him think that maybe he'd been looking for the wrong thing all these years. "I thought I wanted land," he said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink. "A ranch of my own, something that couldn't be taken away. But land is just dirt, Eleanor. It's the people on it that make it matter." "So you're saying I'm better than dirt?" Eleanor teased. "How romantic," he laughed, the sound rich and warm. "You know what I mean." "I do," she sobered. "But Yates, what about that dream? You can't give up everything you wanted just for me." "Who says I'm giving it up?" He shifted to face her. "Maybe I'm just changing what it looks like. Maybe instead of a ranch, it's a store. Maybe instead of working alone, it's building something with someone else." Eleanor's breath caught. "You're talking about the future, our future." "Yes." His eyes were serious again, intense. "Is that too fast?" She should have said yes. They'd only been courting for 3 weeks. But her heart answered before her head could interfere. "No, it's terrifying, but no." He smiled then, slow and genuine, and reached for her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her since that day on the ladder, and the contact sent electricity up her arm. His hand was rough with calluses, warm and strong, and when his thumb brushed across her knuckles, she felt it in her bones. "I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor O'Brien," he said quietly. "I thought you should know." She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the weight of his hand in hers and the truth in his eyes. "That's quite a declaration." "It's the truth. I'm not good with fancy words, so I'm just going to tell you plain. You're the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing before I sleep. You make me want to be better, do better, build something that lasts. And I know it's only been a few weeks, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Yates, you don't have to say anything back, not yet. I just needed you to know." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'll wait as long as you need." But Eleanor realized she didn't want to wait, didn't want to be sensible or cautious or careful. She wanted to leap, to trust, to believe in this impossible thing that had started with her name written in the dust. "I'm falling too," she whispered. "It scares me how much." His smile could have lit up the whole territory. "Scared isn't bad. Scared means it matters." "It matters," she agreed. "You matter." They sat together as the stars came out, hands linked, speaking in soft voices about everything and nothing. When Thomas came to the door and pointedly cleared his throat, Yates stood reluctantly. "I should go. Early morning tomorrow, we're moving cattle to the south pasture." "Be careful," Eleanor said, rising with him. "Always am." He hesitated, then leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. It was chaste, respectful, but it sent heat flooding through Eleanor's entire body. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Yates." She watched him ride away into the darkness, her hand pressed to where he'd kissed her, and knew with absolute certainty that her life had just changed forever. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest Eleanor had ever known. Yates became a fixture in her life, steady and reliable as the sunrise. He came to Sunday dinners and charmed her father with his knowledge of ranching and his willingness to help repair things around the store. He walked her home from church and sat with her on the porch in the evenings, their conversations ranging from the profound to the ridiculous. And slowly, carefully, he courted her with a patience and dedication that made her fall deeper in love with every passing day. In late September, when the brutal heat finally broke and the desert air turned crisp at night, Yates asked Eleanor to go riding with him. She borrowed a gentle mare from the livery stable, and they rode out into the desert together, Yates leading them to a spot he'd found where the land rose slightly, and you could see for miles in every direction. "It's beautiful," Eleanor breathed, taking in the sweep of the desert, the distant mountains purple against the sky, the endless expanse of earth and sky. I wanted to show you something." Yates dismounted and helped her down, his hands strong and sure on her waist. He led her to a flat rock and they sat together, watching the sun begin its descent. "See that land there, the section by those cottonwoods?" Eleanor followed his pointing finger. "Yes, it's for sale. 10 acres with water rights from the creek." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been saving money since I was 20. Every job, every cattle drive, I put away what I could. I've got enough now to buy it, enough to build something." Eleanor's heart began to pound. "Yates, I'm not asking you to decide anything right now," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to see it. Wanted you to know that I'm serious about staying, about building a life here. For me," her voice came out small, "with you, if you'll have me." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Eleanor, I know we've only been courting a few months. I know most people would say it's too soon, but I've never been more certain of anything. I love you. I want to marry you, build a home with you, spend the rest of my life making you happy." Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks. "Are you proposing?" "Not yet. Not until I have a ring and can do it proper." He brushed away her tears with gentle thumbs. "But I'm asking if you think you could say yes when I do, if you love me enough to take a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than sense." Eleanor laughed through her tears. "I love you more than enough. I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes." "Scared means it matters," he reminded her, echoing his words from weeks ago. "It matters, you matter, this matters." She looked at the land he'd shown her, imagining a house there, a life there. "Yes, Yates. When you ask me properly, the answer will be yes." His smile was brilliant, and then he was kissing her, really kissing her for the first time. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and Eleanor melted into him. Her hands came up to his chest, feeling his heart racing as fast as her own, and when he deepened the kiss, she made a small sound of pleasure that seemed to undo him. He pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair, the other splayed across her back, and kissed her like she was air and he was drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. That was worth waiting for. "We should get back before dark," Eleanor said reluctantly. "My father will worry." "I know." But Yates stole another kiss before helping her back onto her horse. They rode back to town slowly, hands occasionally brushing, sharing smiles that held entire conversations. That night, Eleanor lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, her lips still tingling from Yates's kisses, her heart full to bursting. She thought about the land he'd shown her, about the future he was offering, and felt a peace settle over her that she hadn't experienced since her mother died. This was right. Yates was right, and she was going to marry him and build a life that would have made her mother proud. 2 weeks later, on a cool October evening, Yates came to dinner with a small box in his pocket. Thomas saw it immediately and excused himself to the kitchen with a knowing look. Yates took Eleanor's hand and led her to the porch, where the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I've been carrying this around for 3 days," he said, pulling out the box, "waiting for the right moment. Then I realized there's no such thing as the perfect moment. There's just now." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond, modest but beautiful. "It belonged to my grandmother, the only thing of value my father managed to keep when we lost the ranch. He gave it to me before he died and told me to give it to a woman who deserved it." He looked at Eleanor with those serious eyes she'd come to love. "You deserve it, Eleanor. You deserve this and so much more than I can give you, but I'm asking anyway. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me on that land by the cottonwoods? Will you let me spend every day trying to make you happy?" Eleanor didn't hesitate. "Yes, yes to all of it." Yates slipped the ring on her finger with shaking hands, and when it settled into place, fitting perfectly, Eleanor felt something click into alignment in her soul. This was her future. This man, this life, this love. They were married in November, on a crisp Saturday morning with the whole town in attendance. Eleanor wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit, and carried the wildflowers that Yates had picked that morning, just like he had on that first Sunday supper. Her father walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and when he placed her hand in Yates's, he whispered, "Take care of my girl." "With my life, sir," Yates promised. The ceremony was simple, conducted by the traveling preacher who came through Columbus once a month, but to Eleanor it was perfect. She spoke her vows with a steady voice, promising to love and honor Yates for all her days, and when he slid a matching gold band onto her finger, his voice was rough with emotion. "I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you," he said. "To build a life with you that honors both our dreams. To be worthy of the gift you've given me by saying yes." They kissed as husband and wife, and the small church erupted in applause. At the reception in the church hall, they danced to fiddle music and ate cake that Mrs. Henderson had made, and Eleanor felt like she might float away from pure happiness. That night, in the small room above the store that they would share until their house was built, Yates carried Eleanor over the threshold and set her down gently. The room was lit by lanterns, casting everything in warm, golden light, and when he looked at her his eyes were full of wonder. "My wife," he said, testing out the word. "My husband," Eleanor replied, and felt a thrill run through her. He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, and she responded with equal passion. They had the rest of their lives stretching before them, but tonight was just for them, for learning each other and loving each other and sealing the promises they'd made. And as Yates lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bed, Eleanor sent a silent thank you to her mother, to the universe, to whatever force had brought this serious-faced cowboy into her life. The winter months were busy ones. Yates continued working at the Garrett Ranch to save money, but every spare moment was spent on their land, planning and preparing for the house they would build in the spring. Thomas had insisted they stay above the store until the house was finished, not wanting his daughter living in a tent or a half-built structure, and Eleanor was grateful for his practicality even as she longed for a home of her own. She continued running the store with her father, but now she wore Yates's ring on her finger and his name as her own. Eleanor Rutherford. She practiced writing it in the account books and felt a little thrill each time. The town had accepted Yates readily, seeing how hard he worked and how devoted he was to Eleanor. Even the old-timers who usually grumbled about newcomers had to admit that Yates Rutherford was a good man who'd won Eleanor's heart honestly. In January, disaster nearly struck. A winter storm blew in from the north, unusual for southern New Mexico, bringing freezing rain and wind that howled through the streets. Yates had been out checking on the cattle when it hit, and Eleanor spent 3 agonizing hours pacing the floor, worrying until he finally appeared, half frozen but alive. "The cattle are secured," he said through chattering teeth as Eleanor wrapped him in blankets and pushed hot coffee into his hands. "Lost 2 to the cold, but the rest are in the sheltered canyon." "I don't care about the cattle," Eleanor said fiercely. "I care about you. Don't ever scare me like that again." Yates pulled her into his arms, blankets and all. "I'm sorry, I had to make sure they were safe. I know, but you're what's important to me." She looked up at him. "Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't take unnecessary risks." "I promise," he said, and kissed her cold nose. "Though I reserve the right to protect what's mine, including those stubborn cattle." The storm passed, taking with it 2 of the Garrett Ranch's cattle and several trees, but leaving their small family intact. Thomas had watched Yates return with visible relief, and that night at dinner he said, "You're a good man, Yates. I'm glad my daughter has you." It was the highest praise her father had ever given, and Yates ducked his head, clearly moved. "Thank you, sir. That means the world to me." Spring came with a burst of desert wildflowers and renewed energy. Yates bought the land officially, signing the papers at the land office with Eleanor by his side, and they began building their house. Friends and neighbors came to help, a barn raising of sorts, and within 2 months they had a sturdy 3-room house with a porch that faced west so they could watch the sunsets. Moving in was both joyful and bittersweet. Thomas insisted he was fine staying above the store alone, that it was time for the young couple to have their own space, but Eleanor saw the loneliness in his eyes. "You'll come to Sunday dinner every week," she insisted. "And whenever you want company. This is your home too, Papa." The first night in their own house, Yates carried Eleanor over the threshold again, just because he could. They had almost no furniture yet, just a bed and a table and 2 chairs, but it was theirs. They made love by lamplight and fell asleep tangled together, and Eleanor had never felt more content. Summer brought new routines. Eleanor still helped at the store several days a week, but she also began making their house a home, sewing curtains and planting a garden and learning to cook on the wood stove Yates had bought. Yates continued working at the Garrett Ranch, saving money for livestock of their own, but he also came home every night to his wife, which he said made him the luckiest man in New Mexico territory. In August, exactly 1 year after Yates had written Eleanor's name in the dust, they stood together on their porch and watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Eleanor leaned against her husband, his arm around her waist, and thought about how much had changed in such a short time. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That I'm happy," Eleanor said simply. "That I love you, that I'm grateful for the day you rode into town and were brave enough to write my name in the dust. Best decision I ever made." He turned her in his arms to face him. "I have something to tell you." Eleanor's heart skipped. "What?" "Mr. Garrett is selling his ranch. He's getting too old to run it, and his sons have no interest in ranching." Yates took a breath. "He offered to sell it to me at a fair price with terms I can manage." It would mean owning 1,200 acres, a full herd, and 3 good ranch hands who want to stay on. Eleanor's eyes widened. "Yates, that's incredible, but can we afford it?" "With what I've saved and what we could get from a loan, yes. But Eleanor, it would be hard work. Long days, financial risk, all of it." He cupped her face. "I won't do it unless you're with me. This has to be our decision, not just mine." Eleanor thought about the years her parents had struggled to build the store, the risks they'd taken, the hardships they'd endured. But she also remembered the pride in her mother's eyes when she talked about what they'd built together. "I'm with you," she said firmly. "Let's buy the ranch." Yates's smile was brilliant. "We're going to be ranchers, Mrs. Rutherford." "Apparently so, Mr. Rutherford." The negotiations took several weeks, but by September they owned the Garrett Ranch, renamed the Rutherford Ranch in honor of their new beginning. It was overwhelming and exhilarating and terrifying all at once. They moved into the ranch house, larger and grander than their small home, and Eleanor threw herself into learning everything she could about running a ranch household. Thomas sold the store to a young couple from Texas and moved to the ranch with them, taking a room on the first floor where his arthritis wouldn't be bothered by stairs. Having her father close brought Eleanor immense comfort, and he proved invaluable in helping with the account books and inventory management that ranching required. The first year of ranching was brutal. They faced drought, disease, and a cattle rustling incident that nearly destroyed their herd. but they also experienced the profound satisfaction of working together toward a common goal, of building something with their own hands and hearts. Yates was a natural leader, fair but firm with the ranch hands, and Eleanor discovered she had a talent for managing the business side of ranching. In the spring of 1885, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening as they sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the stars appear. "I have some news," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. It took him a moment to understand, and then his eyes went wide. "Eleanor, are you saying? We're going to have a baby. In November, the doctor thinks." Yates let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully. "I'm sorry, should I not be doing that?" "Is spinning bad for the baby?" Eleanor laughed. "I'm pregnant, not fragile, but maybe save the spinning for after the baby arrives." He dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "I'm your father, and I already love you more than you can possibly know." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You're going to be an amazing father." "I hope so." He looked up at her. "I want to give our child everything. Love, security, a home they can be proud of." "You already are," Eleanor assured him, "just by being you." The pregnancy was relatively easy, though the summer heat made Eleanor miserable and the nausea in the early months was brutal. But Yates was attentive and patient, bringing her cold compresses and crackers, rubbing her swollen feet, and talking to her growing belly every night before sleep. Thomas was overjoyed at the prospect of being a grandfather, and the whole household buzzed with anticipation. In November, during a cold snap that brought the first frost, Eleanor went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Yates feared he would lose her. But finally, just before dawn, their son was born, healthy and squalling and perfect. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the baby in Eleanor's arms. Eleanor looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and beautiful, and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. Yates knelt beside the bed, his eyes wet with tears, and touched one finger to his son's cheek. "He's perfect," Yates whispered. "You're perfect. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you for this gift." They named him James Thomas Rutherford after Yates's father and Eleanor's, and he became the center of their world. Yates was a devoted father, rising for middle-of-the-night feedings despite his early ranch mornings, changing diapers without complaint, and singing lullabies in his rough voice that somehow always soothed the baby to sleep. Watching her husband with their son, Eleanor fell in love with him all over again. This was the man who had written her name in the dust, who had looked at her with such serious intent that she'd had no choice but to stay. And every day since had proven that decision right. The years that followed were full of the usual joys and challenges of ranch life and raising a family. They added to their herd, weathered droughts and good years, and watched their son grow from baby to toddler to a bright, curious boy who loved horses and following his father around the ranch. In 1888, Eleanor gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Catherine Rose, after Eleanor's mother. She was smaller than James had been, with delicate features and her mother's dark hair, and Yates was terrified he would break her. But Eleanor showed him how to hold the baby, how to support her head, and soon he was as comfortable with his daughter as he had been with his son. Thomas doted on his grandchildren, telling them stories and teaching James his letters. He lived to see Catherine's second birthday before his heart finally gave out one quiet morning in his sleep. Eleanor grieved deeply, but she took comfort in knowing her father had died happy, surrounded by family, having seen her build the life he'd always wanted for her. The ranch prospered. By 1890, they had one of the largest herds in the territory, and Yates's reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle spread far beyond Columbus. They built additions onto the ranch house, added barns and corrals, and employed a dozen hands year-round. Eleanor managed the household and the books, raised their children, and stood beside her husband as his equal partner in everything they built. In the summer of 1892, on a blazing hot day that reminded Eleanor of the day they'd met, she and Yates rode out to the spot where he'd first shown her their land. The children were with the ranch foreman's wife, giving them a rare afternoon alone. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" Yates asked, helping her down from her horse. "Of course. You told me about buying the land, about wanting to build a life with me." Eleanor looked around at the ranch that now sprawled across the landscape. "We've come a long way from that day." "We have." Yates took her hand. "I've been thinking a lot lately about how it all started, about riding into Columbus with no plan except to find work, and seeing you outside your father's store. And writing my name in the dust like a madman," Eleanor added with a smile. "I knew you'd laugh. Most people would have." He turned to face her fully. "But then I looked at you and I was so serious because I realized what I was doing. I was claiming you, marking you as mine before I had any right to, and you could have walked away. Should have walked away from some crazy cowboy you didn't know. But I didn't." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Because I saw something in your face that made me want to stay, made me want to know what you were going to say next. And I said I wanted to know you, and I let you." Eleanor smiled. "Best decision I ever made." Yates pulled her close. "I love you, Eleanor Rutherford, more now than the day we married, which I wouldn't have thought possible. I love you too." Eleanor rested her head against his chest, hearing his heartbeat steady and strong. "Thank you for writing my name in the dust. Thank you for being serious when I laughed. Thank you for making me stay." "Thank you for staying," Yates replied, and kissed her there in the bright New Mexico sunshine, surrounded by the life they'd built together. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms before riding back to the ranch where their children waited. That evening, as they all sat down to dinner together, Eleanor looked around the table at her family and felt a profound sense of gratitude. James was 8 now, already showing signs of becoming a fine rancher like his father. Catherine was 4, bright and curious and adored by everyone. And Yates sat at the head of the table, his eyes meeting Eleanor's across the room with the same intensity they'd held that first day, some nights, after the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet. Yates and Eleanor would sit on the porch and talk about everything and nothing. They discussed the ranch's future, whether James would want to take it over someday. They talked about Catherine's education and whether they should hire a tutor or send her to school in town. They reminisced about the early days of their courtship, laughing at how nervous they'd both been. "Do you ever regret it?" Yates asked one night. "Marrying me so quickly, taking such a risk," Eleanor pretended to consider. "Well, you did turn out to be more work than advertised. All this ranching business when I thought I'd married a simple cowboy," he laughed. "I'm serious. So am I." But then she softened. "No, Yates, I've never regretted it for a single moment. You've given me a life beyond anything I could have imagined." "We've given each other that," he corrected. "I was nothing before you, just a drifter with a pocket full of dreams and no direction." "You were never nothing." Eleanor took his hand. "You just hadn't found your place yet. My place is with you. Always has been, from the moment I saw you." In 1895, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again at 34, a surprise after 7 years since Catherine's birth. This pregnancy was harder than the others, and the doctor warned her to take it easy. Yates fretted constantly, insisting she rest, hiring additional help for the household, and generally driving her crazy with his concern. "I'm fine," Eleanor insisted for the 100th time. Women have babies all the time. Not my wife, Yates said stubbornly. My wife is precious and I won't take chances. The baby, another boy they named Daniel, arrived in March of 1896, small but healthy. James, now 13, was fascinated by his baby brother, while 9-year-old Catherine was less impressed with the squalling infant who stole everyone's attention. But gradually, she warmed to Daniel, especially when he would calm down at the sound of her singing. With 3 children and a thriving ranch, life was busier than ever, but Eleanor wouldn't have changed a thing. Every morning she woke beside the man who had written her name in the dust, and every night she fell asleep grateful for the life they'd built together. The turn of the century brought changes to New Mexico territory. Railroads expanded, bringing more people and commerce. Columbus grew from a dusty border town to a thriving community. The Rutherford Ranch became one of the most respected operations in the territory, known for quality cattle and honest dealing. James showed no interest in ranching, to Yates's surprise. Instead, he wanted to study law, inspired by the traveling judge who came through Columbus regularly. Yates struggled with disappointment initially, but Eleanor reminded him that they'd built the ranch to give their children opportunities, and if James wanted to be a lawyer, they should support him. "You're right," Yates admitted. "I just always imagined him taking over the ranch someday." "Maybe Daniel will want to," Eleanor suggested. "Or maybe we'll sell it when the time comes and retire to a little house in town. The ranch isn't the important part, Yates. The family is." So they sent James east to school when he turned 18, waving goodbye with mixed emotions. Catherine, 15 and beautiful, had several young men from neighboring ranches calling on her, which made Yates grumpy and protective. And Daniel, at 5, was showing signs of inheriting his father's love for horses and cattle work. In 1903, Catherine married a young rancher named Michael Porter in a wedding that rivaled Eleanor and Yates's own. As Yates walked his daughter down the aisle, Eleanor saw tears in his eyes and knew he was remembering giving away his little girl. But Michael was a good man, hardworking and devoted to Catherine, and they could ask for nothing more. James became a lawyer and opened a practice in Santa Fe, occasionally handling legal matters for the ranch. Daniel, at 12, was already working alongside his father, learning everything about ranching. And Eleanor and Yates, now in their 40s, settled into a comfortable rhythm that came from 20 years of marriage and partnership. One evening in the summer of 1904, Yates found Eleanor in the parlor, looking at an old photograph from their wedding day. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting beside her. "How young we were. How brave." Eleanor traced the image of herself in her mother's dress. "Sometimes I can't believe that girl had the courage to say yes to you. I can. She was the bravest person I'd ever met." Yates took the photograph and studied it. "We've lived a good life, haven't we? The best life." Eleanor leaned against him. "Do you ever think about that day when you wrote my name in the dust, all the time? It was the day my real life started." He set down the photograph and turned to her. "I'd do it again, you know, all of it. Every hard year, every challenge, every moment of fear and joy and love. I'd do it all again just to end up here with you." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You old romantic. What happened to the serious cowboy who couldn't string 2 words together? You happened to him, made him believe in poetry and declarations and love that lasts." Yates wiped away her tears. "I love you, Eleanor. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "That's definitely poetry," Eleanor laughed through her tears. "Daniel's been reading it to me," Yates admitted with a sheepish grin. "Figured after 20 years of marriage I should improve my romantic vocabulary." Eleanor kissed him, soft and sweet and full of the accumulated love of 2 decades. Your romantic vocabulary was perfect from the start. You wrote my name in the dust and looked at me like I was the answer to every question you'd ever had. That was all the poetry I needed. The years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren and gray hair and the comfortable rhythms of a life well lived. Catherine had 3 children who visited the ranch regularly, filling it with laughter and noise. James married a woman from Santa Fe and had twin daughters. And Daniel, at 18, took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing the same dedication and skill his father had. In 1910, as Eleanor and Yates celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, the family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. 3 generations of Rutherfords filled the house and yard, and as Eleanor looked around at all the faces, all the love, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Yates found her on the porch, escaping the noise for a moment of quiet. Hiding from your own party, just taking it all in. Eleanor gestured to the scene before them. All of this came from one moment, from you writing my name in the dust and me being brave enough to stay, or foolish enough, Yates teased. Same thing sometimes. Eleanor took his hand. Thank you, Yates, for all of it. For choosing me, for building this with me, for giving me a life beyond my wildest dreams. I should be thanking you. You took a chance on a dusty cowboy with nothing to offer but dreams and determination. He pulled her into his arms. You made me believe I could be more than I was. You made me want to build something that would last. And we did. Eleanor rested her head against his chest. We really did. They stood together watching the sunset, just as they had countless times before, and Eleanor thought about the girl she'd been, laughing at a cowboy writing her name in the dust. She'd thought he was crazy, maybe, or joking. But then she'd seen his face, serious and intent, and full of a conviction that had stopped her in her tracks. And she'd stayed, taking the first step on a journey that had led to everything she held dear. Inside, their family called for them, and hand in hand they returned to the party, to the celebration of a love that had started with dust and laughter, and a serious face that promised forever. The following years were gentler, marked by grandchildren's birthdays and quiet evenings on the porch. Daniel married a neighboring rancher's daughter in 1913, a sweet woman named Anna who loved the ranch almost as much as he did. They moved into the original house Yates and Eleanor had built, the one that had been their first home together, and began their own journey. Eleanor and Yates, now in their 50s, gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Daniel proved to be a capable manager, and they trusted him completely. It gave them time to travel a bit, visiting James in Santa Fe and Catherine at her own ranch 50 miles north. But they always came back to their home, to the land that had been the foundation of their life together. In the spring of 1915, Yates took Eleanor riding out to the spot where he'd first proposed, where he'd shown her the land that would become their ranch. It was a perfect day, the kind of crystalline blue sky that only New Mexico seemed to produce, and the desert was carpeted with wildflowers. I've been thinking, Yates said as they stood looking out over the ranch, about legacy, about what we leave behind. Eleanor's heart clenched. Are you feeling all right? Is something wrong? No, he squeezed her hand. I'm fine. Better than fine. But we're not young anymore, Eleanor, and I want to make sure everything is set for the children, for the grandchildren. Daniel will take care of the ranch, Eleanor said. He loves it as much as you do. I know, but it's not just about the ranch. Yates turned to face her fully. It's about making sure they know what matters. The land, the cattle, the house, all of that is just things. What matters is what we built together. The love, the partnership, the family. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. They know that, Yates. They see it every day in how we are with each other. I hope so. He pulled her close. I want them to know that the best decision I ever made was writing your name in the dust and refusing to take it back when you laughed. I want them to know that love, real love, is worth every risk and every hardship. They know, Eleanor assured him. How could they not? You've shown them every single day for 30 years. They rode back to the ranch slowly, savoring the afternoon. That evening, surrounded by family at dinner, Yates raised his glass. I want to make a toast, he said, his voice carrying across the noisy table. To Eleanor, who took a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than sense. To our children, who have made us prouder than we ever thought possible. And to family, which is the only thing in this world that really matters. To family, everyone echoed. And Eleanor saw James and Catherine exchange knowing smiles, saw Daniel raise his glass to his father with obvious love and respect. After dinner, as had become their habit, Eleanor and Yates sat on the porch watching the stars appear. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Eleanor asked. "After you wrote my name in the dust, I said a lot of things, most of them probably foolish. You said you were claiming something, making your intentions known." Eleanor looked at him. "Did you really know, even then, that we'd end up here?" Yates considered. "I knew I'd found something precious, something worth fighting for, whether I knew exactly how it would turn out, no. But I knew I'd spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You've always been worthy," Eleanor said firmly. "From the very first moment. That's generous of you to say. It's the truth." Eleanor took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that had never wavered. "You wrote my name in the dust, Yates Rutherford, and you changed my entire life." "We changed each other's lives," he corrected. "That's what love does. It transforms us into better versions of ourselves." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the desert night unfold around them. Inside, they could hear the murmur of voices as their family settled in for the evening, the sound of grandchildren being put to bed, the ordinary domestic sounds that represented everything they'd built. "I'd do it again," Eleanor said suddenly. "Every single moment, every hard decision, every scary step into the unknown. I'd do it all again just to end up here with you." Yates smiled, the expression visible even in the darkness. "Good, because I was thinking the same thing." The years that followed were marked by the steady accumulation of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, of birthdays and holidays and ordinary days made extraordinary by love. The ranch continued to prosper under Daniel's management, and Eleanor and Yates settled into the role of beloved matriarch and patriarch, dispensing wisdom and stories to eager young listeners. In 1920, as they approached their 35th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered once again. There were now 12 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, and the ranch house was bursting at the seams with Rutherfords. During the celebration, James stood and called for quiet. "I'd like to say something," he announced. "As the oldest child, I feel I should speak for all of us." He looked at his parents with obvious affection. "We grew up watching you too, watching how you worked together, how you supported each other, how you loved each other even when things were hard. You taught us what marriage should look like, what partnership means, what it means to build a life with someone." Catherine stood beside her brother. "You gave us everything, not just material things, though you certainly provided well. You gave us a foundation of love and security that let us believe we could do anything." Daniel rose as well, joining his siblings. "And you showed us that love isn't just romance and pretty words. It's choosing each other every single day. It's working side by side toward common goals. It's building something that lasts." He raised his glass. "To the best parents anyone could ask for, happy anniversary." The room erupted in applause and cheers, and Eleanor found herself crying as Yates pulled her close. "Our children," he said softly. "Look at what we made." Not just the children, Eleanor replied. Look at all of this, all of them. This is our legacy, Yates, this love spread across generations. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Eleanor and Yates walked out into the yard. The moon was full, casting everything in silver light, and the desert was quiet and peaceful. Yates led Eleanor to a clear patch of ground and crouched down. "What are you doing?" Eleanor asked, confused. Without answering, Yates began tracing something in the dust. Eleanor watched as he carefully wrote her name, just as he had 35 years earlier. Eleanor O'Brien, even though she'd been Eleanor Rutherford for more than 3 decades. "That was my name," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "Before I was yours." "You were always yours," Yates corrected, standing and brushing off his hands. "I just got lucky enough that you chose to share your life with me." He looked at her in the moonlight. "But I wanted to do it again. Write your name, claim you, make my intentions known." "After 35 years of marriage, I think your intentions are pretty clear," Eleanor said, but she was smiling through her tears. "Maybe, but I wanted to remind myself, that this all started with a simple gesture and a serious face, and a woman brave enough to stay when she could have walked away." Eleanor looked down at her name in the dust, already beginning to blur in the night breeze. "It's going to blow away again. Doesn't matter. I know what I wrote." "You know what I wrote. That's enough." He pulled her into his arms. "I love you, Eleanor. I've loved you since the moment I saw you. I'll love you until the day I die and beyond if such things are possible." "They're possible," Eleanor said, thinking of her mother, of the love that had sustained her parents through hardship and loss. "Love like ours doesn't end. It echoes through the generations, lives on in our children and their children." They stood together in the moonlight, and Eleanor felt the same certainty she'd felt that first day when Yates's serious face had made her stay. This was right. He was right. They were right together, and no amount of time could diminish what they'd built. The 1920s brought change to New Mexico and to the Rutherford family. The territory became a state in 1912, though they hadn't celebrated much at the time, too focused on the ranch and family. James's law practice thrived in Santa Fe, and he became involved in state politics. Catherine's children were growing up and starting families of their own. And Daniel's management of the ranch ensured it would survive and thrive for another generation. Eleanor and Yates, now in their 60s, spent most of their time on the porch, watching the world change around them while their love remained constant. They told stories to great-grandchildren about the old days, about coming to New Mexico territory when it was still wild and dangerous, about building something from nothing. "Tell us about how you met," the children would beg, and Yates would smile. "I wrote your great-grandmother's name in the dust," he'd say, "and she laughed at me." "But then what?" they'd chorus, even though they'd heard the story 100 times. "But then I looked at her with my most serious face." Yates would continue, his eyes finding Eleanor's across the porch. "And she decided to stay and find out what I had to say." "And what did you say?" the youngest great-grandchild would ask. "I said I wanted to know her, and she let me, and that made all the difference." Eleanor would smile, remembering that day, that moment, that choice. She'd been so young, so uncertain, but something in Yates's face had called to something in her soul. And she'd listened, thank God. She'd listened and stayed and built a life beyond anything she could have imagined. In the summer of 1925, on a day that reminded Eleanor forcefully of the day they'd met, Yates suffered a mild stroke. The doctor said he'd recover, but he needed to rest, to take it easy. Eleanor nursed him back to health with the same fierce determination she brought to everything, and within a few weeks he was up and moving around again, though not quite as strong as before. "You scared me," Eleanor told him one evening as they sat together. his hand in hers. "I scared myself," Yates admitted. "I'm not ready to leave you yet, Eleanor. We have more time together." "We do," she agreed firmly. "Lots more time." And they did have more time, though both of them were aware of its preciousness now. They made the most of every day, every conversation, every sunset watched from the porch. Their children visited regularly, and the house was always full of family, but Eleanor's favorite moments were the quiet ones, just her and Yates, holding hands and remembering the life they'd built together. In 1928, they celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary with a small gathering, just immediate family. James was there with his wife and grown daughters. Catherine brought her husband and some of their grandchildren. And Daniel, who lived just across the property, was there with Anna and their children. After dinner, Yates stood with some difficulty, using the cane he'd needed since the stroke. "I want to say something," he announced. 43 years ago, I married the love of my life. And every single day since then has been a gift I didn't deserve but tried my best to earn." Eleanor felt tears stream down her face. "Yates, let me finish," he said gently. "I want our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren to know something. Love is a choice you make every single day. It's not always easy. There were times we struggled, times we disagreed, times we had to work hard to understand each other. But we chose each other every single day, and that made all the difference." He looked at Eleanor with those same serious eyes that had captured her heart 43 years ago. "I wrote your name in the dust and you laughed, but then you stayed. And that was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. The chance to love you, to build a life with you, to be loved by you in return." Eleanor stood and went to him, putting her arms around him carefully. "You wrote my name," she said softly, "and you changed everything. You made me believe in love at first sight, in taking chances, in building dreams. You gave me everything I didn't know I wanted." They kissed, gentle and sweet, and their family cheered and applauded. And Eleanor thought about the girl she'd been, standing on a dusty street in Columbus, watching a cowboy write her name with such serious intent. She'd had no idea that day what she was saying yes to, but she'd never regretted it, not for one single moment. The years grew shorter as they do, but sweeter too. In 1930, Yates's health began to fail more seriously. The doctor said his heart was wearing out, that there was nothing to be done except make him comfortable. Eleanor refused to accept it at first, raging against the unfairness, but Yates was calm. "We've had 45 years, he reminded her. "That's more than most people get. That's a lifetime of love and joy and family." "It's not enough," Eleanor said fiercely. "I want more, I want forever." "Then you'll have it." Yates took her hand. "Because love like ours doesn't end, Eleanor. It goes on in our children, in the ranch we built, in every life we touched. That's forever." He died on a quiet morning in October with Eleanor holding his hand and his children gathered around his bed. His last words were, "I love you, Eleanor. Thank you for staying." Eleanor was devastated by his loss, hollowed out by grief. For weeks she barely ate, barely spoke, wandering through the ranch house like a ghost. Her children worried, but Daniel's wife Anna understood. "Let her grieve," Anna said. "They were married for 45 years. Part of her died with him." But gradually, Eleanor began to heal. She found comfort in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the ranch that she and Yates had built together, in the memories that surrounded her everywhere she looked. And she found purpose in making sure their story, their love, wasn't forgotten. She spent her remaining years telling stories, writing letters, making sure every child and grandchild knew exactly how she and Yates had met, how he'd written her name in the dust, how his serious face had made her stay. She wanted them to understand that love was worth fighting for, worth risking for, worth building a life around. Eleanor lived another 12 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1942 at the age of 81. Her last thoughts were of Yates, of his serious face and gentle hands, of the life they'd built together. And her last image was of her name, written in the dust of a Columbus street, claimed by a cowboy brave enough to declare his intentions before he had any right to them. The family buried her next to Yates on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch the sunsets together for eternity. At the funeral, Daniel spoke about his parents' love, about the legacy they'd left. "My father wrote my mother's name in the dust," he said. It seemed like a small gesture, almost silly, but it was everything. It was a claim, a promise, a declaration. And my mother, brave and beautiful, decided to stay and see what would happen. What happened was a love story for the ages, a partnership that built this ranch and this family, a legacy that will endure for generations. He looked at the crowd gathered there, 4 generations of Rutherfords and their spouses and children. This is what they built. Not just the ranch, though that's thriving under my care and will pass to my children someday. They built this family, this love, this connection that binds us all together. They showed us what it means to choose each other every single day, to work together toward common goals, to build something that lasts. After the funeral, the family gathered at the ranch house. James found the old photograph from his parents' wedding day and set it on the mantel. Catherine arranged wildflowers, the kind Yates used to pick for Eleanor. And Daniel stood on the porch, looking out over the land his parents had claimed and built and loved, and felt their presence everywhere. Years later, Daniel's granddaughter asked him about Yates and Eleanor, wanting to know their story for a school project. Daniel told her everything, his voice warm with memory and love. "Your great-great-grandfather was a cowboy," he said, "just a drifter looking for work. But when he saw your great-great-grandmother, something changed in him. He wrote her name in the dust of Main Street, right there in front of everyone. She laughed because it seemed absurd." "But then what happened?" his granddaughter asked, leaning forward eagerly. But then she looked at his face and saw he was serious, dead serious, and that made her stay, made her want to know what he would say next. Daniel smiled. He said he wanted to know her, and she let him, and from that one moment, from that one choice, came all of this. This ranch, this family, all of us, because 2 people were brave enough to take a chance on love. The granddaughter was quiet for a moment. "That's so romantic." "It is," Daniel agreed, "but it was also real. They worked hard, they struggled, they had disagreements and challenges. But they chose each other every single day, and that made all the difference." "I want a love like that someday," the girl said wistfully. "Then be brave enough to stay when someone writes your name in the dust," Daniel advised. "Be brave enough to take a chance. Be brave enough to build something that lasts." The story of Yates and Eleanor Rutherford became family legend, passed down through generations. The ranch prospered and eventually expanded, passed from Daniel to his children and then to theirs. The house was preserved and maintained, filled with photographs and memories. And every new generation learned about the cowboy who wrote a name in the dust, and the woman who laughed but stayed, because his serious face promised something worth having. In 1983, exactly 100 years after that fateful meeting, the Rutherford family held a massive reunion at the ranch. Hundreds of descendants gathered, all connected by the love story that had started it all. They stood in the yard where Yates had once rewritten Eleanor's name in the moonlight, and they told stories and shared memories, and celebrated the legacy of love that had created them all. And if the wind occasionally stirred the dust into patterns that looked almost like letters, almost like a name being written by an invisible hand, well, the family chose to believe it was Yates and Eleanor, still together, still in love, still watching over the family they'd created. Because that's what love does. It endures. It echoes through the generations. It builds legacies that outlast buildings and ranches and lifetimes. It starts with a simple gesture, a serious face, and a choice to stay. And it grows into something beautiful, something lasting, something that changes the world in ways both large and small. The cowboy wrote her name in the dust. She laughed, but his serious face made her stay. And from that moment came a love story that would never end, rippling forward through time, touching countless lives, proving that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take a chance on love and see where it leads.